Welcome everyone to Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I'll be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about learning and education. And today I'm going to be bringing on Gregg Goodhart, who's a learning coach, and he's going to be helping us understand what's going on in learning and how to be effective learners. Because it might be straightforward to be an effective learner, right? Simply show up. Now, I wish it was that simple because there's a lot to learning that has to be understood. It's not so simple, read this book, and then all of a sudden you know this content. There's more to learning than meets the eye, and it takes an effective teacher or an effective individual to know how to effectively teach. Anyone can be a teacher, but can you be an effective teacher? That is very important. We need to understand how to be effective, because if we just allowed anyone to teach our kids anything, what would happen? Well, guess what will happen? It's already happening. Opinions are being taught in school. Someone has an opinion about what they should believe or what they should do. There's a big epidemic right now of having kids-friendly drag queen shows. And you could be a boy or you could be a girl, but you could be the opposite sex too. So a boy is no longer a boy can be a girl if he wants to or feels like it. A girl could be a boy if she feels like it. I mean, that might be a can of worms, but in reality, that is what's happening. Education is not so much of here are the facts, let me teach them to you. There's so many wrong things taught in the schools. And there's so many things that are taught in schools that have to be unlearned when we're adults. So I'm working with many parents who are having these high schoolers and, kids going off to college, and I'm helping them learn how to reflect, learning how to figure out, okay, this is critical thinking, because they don't think. They simply just do. The teacher says to do it and you do it and it's done. But did you question it? Did you really look on the inside? Did you look on the opposite side? What would happen if? And many people don't look on the other side. So we have a choice. We have an opportunity right now to look on the other side, to understand learning. In order to do that, we do have to have a good concept of what learning is. And we're going to get into that right now with Gregg Goodhart. Welcome, Gregg Goodhart, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And today I have you on as a learning coach. The idea of a learning coach, we can go down so many different paths. And then even if you say you're a learning coach, you can definitely maybe have a different specialty in different areas. For example, a life coach might work with different people in certain areas. A life coach can work with people maybe in the beginning stages of life. So they're going to work with young children. Maybe they're going to work with maybe teenagers, or maybe they can work with adults or someone who's going to be later in their ages. So you can have a different specialty, and we all have a different audience that we try to reach. Here in Coaching in Session, we have a wide variety of people who come in and learn, because there's so many coaches that come onto the podcast, give their 2 cents and to kind of give their opinion on what's going on in their profession. So without me talking about what learning coaching is, can you kind of give us a description of that and tell the world who you are?
Well, I'm Gregg Goodhart. I would sum it all up like this. How successful we are at anything we choose to do in life will be a direct result, for the most part, of how well we learn to do that thing. It can be used to do good. It can be used to do evil. It can be used to do anything, but it's how well we will learn that thing. The principles of learning, which are found in cognitive science and are not taught in our education programs where we train teachers in this country, the principles of learning are applicable to everything. It doesn't matter. So I started out in music, which is a unique place to start because it's a performance. I was a music teacher. I have a master's degree in music performance. And so naturally, I went into that field. That's where I had my training. And as I went through, it was I could tell you all about, 5-year process to realize talent wasn't what most people think it is, because I didn't want to only teach talented kids. I wanted to teach in a way that was available to everyone. So I dumbed everything down until I realized how far I could bring it up. And I realized it didn't matter student to student. It mattered amount of previous experience, amount and type of work that they were doing. We're just not teaching this type. I was listening a little bit to an earlier podcast of yours talking about early education. We should be teaching this stuff from the very beginning. We're not teaching it at all. So when I started to figure these things out, about 5 years for the talent thing, then I said, well, if I've got this blank slate, what do I do? About the next 5 years, picking up, I think the way a lot of really good teachers pick things up, tips and tricks. We don't necessarily investigate the science. We try, we get a little bit from Facebook or from the news, and then we try a little bit here, a little bit. And that's not how you apply science. Of course, you've got to be very disciplined about it. And there's all kinds of problems understanding it because we're not trained in it, which takes a long time. It took me forever to do that. And so I picked it up, tips and tricks, little things, and found things that really worked well, unintuitive things that worked well. And I started putting it together. And then in my 10th year, I read a book that started introducing the cognitive science and the idea of what natural ability really was and what our information from historical stories and things we hear about Mozart and people like that and how that really worked. It was like opening, the scales fell from my eyes. I said, oh my gosh, it's not just tips and tricks. That little tip over here is part of something called contextual interference. And now I can read about it now that I know the name, and I can build that out. That's where it started. And I would always tell my kids in my music classes, say, if you will do your homework for all your classes the way you're doing your homework for this class, that is paying attention to what you do, checking if you got it right. The breakdown I use for deliberate practice is plan, do, reflect. Most people don't reflect. If you'll do your other work this way, you'll get A's in all your classes with less work, because you're also, by the way, working on little bits that are going to be on the test 3 months in advance, little bits. And in fact, I would tell people, if you will just try this for 2 weeks in any class, pick a point where you have a test or beginning of semester, pick one class, not gym, pick one class and spend 2 weeks doing every assignment the way it's assigned, no shortcuts, the day it's assigned. Anything you don't understand, just ask the teacher the next day. If they can't meet with you, go find them at break, whatever it is. Just do that. Just that. Don't put it off for 3 days. Don't do 4 homework assignments one night, the night before, just one class. Had something like 10 to 13 people take me up on that in the 13 years I was at that particular high school. And it always happened the same way. They'd come running out to my office. I was a music teacher, so they had me way over somewhere on campus where no one could find me. I loved it. I was out of all the hubbub that was everywhere else. And they'd come running out to my office and say, Mr. Goodhart, I can't believe it. I barely reviewed for like 15 minutes before the test. And then I went in and all the answers came into my head. I only got one wrong. It was a dumb mistake because I wasn't thinking. And then they wouldn't do it ever again. And these are the things that we can inculcate from a young age. But anyway, I learned that this process works for everything. And I realized the information I was getting from cognitive science was coming from studies with people in academics. Some of it was motor skill learning, for sure, very important. By the way, all this stuff, more or less, that works for motor skills, works for soft skills, like cognitive skills, critical thinking, those sorts of things. At first, I realized, oh my gosh, I can do this with more than guitar. And I started doing something I've never seen anyone else do. I started teaching all instruments. I don't teach them where to put their fingers on the keys or anything like that. I know how to play a few other instruments a little bit outside of my specialty, which is classical guitar. But not at all. I see people that come up, I have videos online. I see people all over the country come up to me playing music I've never heard on an instrument. I have no idea how it works. And in 20 minutes, we fix that thing that they've been struggling with for the last 3 months. You have experience giving concerts and music. You know those 2 or 3 or 4 things that no matter how hard you try, you can't get them at tempo when you step on stage. And you're worried about it all semester as you get up to the concert. And we just can't fix them when we say, maybe I don't have the talent. Maybe I'll practice harder next time. No, there's like little things you can do to take care of it like that. That's my little kind of bit of proof that maybe it's not talent. Maybe it's something else. So I started doing this with all instruments, which was scary as heck at first because I used to wonder if I could do it. Now it's easy. Then I realized, oh my gosh, this applies to academics. So I started having meetings with teachers at school every couple of weeks to get together and discuss the science. And then I got into a situation where I needed to find another job, and I'm a forced entrepreneur. Started figuring out how to apply this first in music and then elsewhere. And I just end up where I end up. I've talked to people in sport. It's all the same. It's all the same. Deliberate practice works the same for any instrument, for math, science, football, acting. It doesn't matter. It works. I've coached actors. It's amazing. But it's not a life coach thing in that sense. I'm not going to tell you what you should do, what decisions you should make. You tell me what you want to do. The information's easy to find. It's easy enough to find a teacher. And for instance, music lessons, I don't teach, even on my instrument, I don't teach them my instrument. They have someone else giving them the material, giving them the advice of good technique and all that. I tell you how to do that thing, what you should do in practice. As someone experienced in music, maybe you didn't do this, but I'm sure you knew plenty of others who did. Practice sessions are play and pray. You go in and you do stuff for an hour and you hope you get better, and you still never get over those certain humps that cause you problems on stage. Those are easy to get through. You play and plan. There's a plan for everything. So I started applying this to everything. And that's kind of where I'm at. I never know where it's going to go next. And a lot of it is in music now. And I wrote a little book on that. I'm now doing a general book on how to apply this everywhere. But it's everything. And so I don't teach how to operate a saxophone or what math formulas you need to learn now to get through algebra. I look at the book you already have. I'm in addition to another teacher. And this is the area we don't teach people in school. We teach them what to learn. Then we send them home to do all their homework and all their studying on their own to figure out the single most important part. How do I actually learn this stuff? How do I get it into my long-term memory and then get it out for critical thinking? We leave this to individuals. That's bad enough to begin with, but we don't teach it to their parents. Our teachers don't teach it in school. We teachers don't know how to do it. And it's so weird the way it does not work the way we think it does. You do not want to be studying for a test and highlighting in different colors and then rereading. You wonder why we still have problems with testing anxiety. Testing anxiety, for the most part, shouldn't be a thing. If you look at the numbers on social anxiety disorder, 13% of Americans or so, you can find other figures. Yet testing anxiety shows up, and especially stage fright anxiety for musicians, shows up in far greater percentages in the real world. The reason for this is the testing anxiety or stage fright is caused because you can't find the answers. It's not the anxiety causing you to not find the answers. It's lack of preparation. And what you'll find in these situations is, but I tried. You were a teacher for long enough. Try has a lot of different definitions for people. Try rarely means I followed all the directions specifically day in and day out to get better at this. And by the way, directions coming from those of us who were not trained in these things. So the things you actually have to do, like retrieval practice, which is don't repeat something over and over to learn it and memorize it, understand it, and then put 5-minute gaps in between and do it once. When you can do that for a session, 10. When you can do that for a session, 20. And then you have groups that you return to for retrieval practice, because that's how it's going to work when you get into the test. You're not going to have cues. You're not going to have recency of thinking about it. You have to pull it out of nowhere. And that's how it's going to use when you use the knowledge for critical thinking. You're going to be in a different environment. You're going to be in a conversation. You're going to be doing wherever, and your brain needs to find that information. And this is just one area I'm giving, and there's a lot of them that are so different than the way we think it works. This retrieval practice. Our system of education is not too bad. It could be way more efficient of producing people that can get stuff into their brains. Horrible at teaching people how to get stuff back out. That's the problem.
There's so many issues with the education system here in America right now, and we can have all these solutions, but it's always going to go back to what it was, because there's a bunch of people who weren't teachers, who might not be educators or just politicians, and they think they know what's best. Oh, let's give them some tests. Let's give them some homework so they can memorize some things and they can jot down on the test. And then they go off into the real world and they finally realize when they're 18 and they are all graduated from high school and maybe they don't want to go to college, they find out that they're not equipped and they need to learn. They need to learn how to be an adult. They need to learn how to survive, because we don't teach them how to survive. We just say, okay, well, here's some history knowledge. I want you to remember it. And here's the test for it. Here's some math knowledge, trigonometry. Most people are never going to use it in their daily life. Like maybe if you want to be an engineer and things like that. Yeah, of course. But most people are just going to be your regular go-to-mill workers. They're 9-to-5ers, and they're not going to use that type of skill. And we have to understand that with our youth, because we need to teach them things that they're going to be able to use. And just how you have learned things in your career of teaching, you've amassed things that you have learned, whether from mentors, whether from reading books, or whether from personal experience. You learn what works, what doesn't work, and then how to be more effective. And that is what truly makes a good teacher. How can I be more effective? And it seems like you have your hand on the right button right now, and you just have to press it, and everything is going to change in the world, in the whole entire education system. But we have to make it so simple, stupid simple, for teachers to understand, for parents to understand, for students to understand. So you said something that you have like the principles, and I kind of want to go in maybe sequential order to break it down, and then to maybe give some examples, and then to keep on moving on. And it might be a lot. Use the 5 or 6 things you speak about that you work with, and then kind of make it so simple where anyone who's listening can say, this is what I need. And then, of course, you're the guide that's going to facilitate that.
So what you're talking about is something I always called in education, meeting the student where they're at. You can't teach them trigonometry until they learn algebra. You can't teach them algebra until they learn to add and subtract and multiply. In science, this is called cognitive load theory. You can't have too much load on your working memory, which only holds 7 to 9 pieces at a time. You have to have some of it in your long-term memory and have it accessible, retrievable. I always called it meeting the student. I didn't know what it was for a long time. Meeting the student where they're at. The example I would use is you write on the board to be or not to be. This is Shakespeare. Do you know what Shakespeare is? No. Okay. Can you read this sentence? No. Do you know what a word is? No. Do you know what a letter is? No. Then we're starting with the alphabet. That's where we will start. So that's how I look at everything. You have to understand people. I just assume people are as dumb as I am and don't know anything and need things explained in a very basic way. And so, for instance, deliberate practice, which is probably the central idea, and I think a lot of us have heard of it, it's poorly explained. There's big, long books about it. So how do you really get started? That's one of the biggest things I noticed when I was out lecturing. People like, this is amazing. And then I'd come back to the place again 8 months or a year or two later or whatever. Did you do any of the things? No, because you don't know where to get started. So the idea is to make it simple enough. The first step should be the first step. So there should be a first step. For instance, for deliberate practice, I have an interesting story about this. The guy who came up with this, K. Anders Ericsson, the researcher, the whole 10,000 hour rule thing, which isn't a real thing. He will tell you that was sensationalized by Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers. Anyway, he's the guy who did all that research. And I was going to Florida State to do some lectures and things. And I emailed him. He actually showed up. I'm in this classroom with all these people, and he's sitting about 15 feet away, and I'm about to click on the slide. I said, deliberate practice. This is the central thing. And he's sitting there, and this is a guy I admire very much. And I've read tons of his work, and I'm going, and I realize I'm about to click the slide I'm about to show you. And then I've never run it by him, and it boils down his work into a 3-step process. Abject fear. I don't know that I've ever been so scared as I was in that moment, going, oh, gosh, I probably should have shown the guy this stuff before I did it. We met later and talked about it. He did have a couple criticisms, but not about that. So he was cool with that. So it's this. If you're going to do something, do it this way. If you're just listening to this, I'm holding up the shape of a triangle, and in each corner of the triangle are the words plan in one of them, do in another, and reflect in the other. And there are arrows going one way from one word to the other. So no matter where you start, you keep going to the next word. Plan goes to do goes to reflect goes back to plan. So whenever you want to do something, whenever you want to complete an assignment, whenever you want to start learning something, this will take you wherever you need to go. Plan, I want to become a super rich CEO. Do, here I go. Reflect. I'm probably going to have to do a lot of things to get ready for that. I don't think I can just walk into a company and ask to be hired as a CEO. Eventually, this will get you down to the smallest thing that you need to do to get better, whatever that is. And getting a teacher, especially if you don't know something, someone to help you through this. In fact, the definition of deliberate practice is this type of practice with a teacher. He came up with another name called purposeful practice to illustrate doing it without a teacher, because I do this without a teacher all the time. This is how we should be doing our homework at home. So whatever it is, you do the thing. You make a plan. I'm going to do the thing, whatever it is. Then this is the part we all leave out. There's a whole book by Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning researcher, called Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about how we automatize our behaviors. And it's really hard to engage the part of our brains that reflect. It's called orienting selective attention. And human beings hate doing this. Great example is telling a kid to take the garbage out at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, summer night. What's so hard about that? But we hated that when we were kids, because it forces us to stop doing the easy thing we're doing and force our brain to make us do something we don't want to do. Now, that's one thing for taking out the garbage. Try doing it over and over and over and over again every minute you're working on something. You're working on your math homework, whatever it is. You're working on your math homework, and you do the problem. Reflect. Did I get it right? Let me double check. For instance, algebra, you can probably do it backwards to check it. Okay, or I'm just going to double check. Do we double check? We don't. We just finish, because the goal is to complete the assignment rather than to learn. This makes things easier. This is not laziness. Not doing this is not laziness. It's the brain conserving energy. The brain's going to look for the best way it can conserve energy. The brain can't store energy. It only uses energy in the form of glucose. So it's always wanting to conserve it. So it's not saying I'm cheating or I'm trying to shortcut. It's saying what's the most efficient way? And we're terrible at figuring out the most efficient way, which really looks like laziness, but it's not. This reflect piece, constantly thinking, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Is there anything better? Will always lead to deeper investigation. So this is how I break down deliberate practice. The next thing I usually talk about is contextual interference. That is doing something that you're trying to learn in a different or new way with things that actually make it harder to do and harder to learn. For instruments and things like that, take a passage you're working on and play it with a different rhythm. Play it with 2 or 3 different rhythms. Even if it's something you can play relatively well, watch it will fall apart like crazy. And if you watch my videos doing this with people, I'm saying, no, stay with it. In the struggle is the learning. We tend to tell people, and this is the way I taught for many years, if you don't get better pretty quickly, then you're not learning. So we either need to change what you're doing or something. No, if you don't get better pretty quickly, a lot of times is what you're doing is you're making yourself super great for 1 or 2 or 3 days later. And it won't show up until later. Now, I've gotten it to the point where if I'm working with someone who's been working on something for a while, I can do it in 20 minutes. But whatever it is, For instance, if you want to memorize something, we'll talk about retrieval practice in a second, but do it backwards. Trust me, it works. So you can do it forwards 50 times in a row, or you can do it forwards a couple times and get it, and then try from memory to do it backwards. You'll struggle like crazy. It will look like it's not working, and then come back to it later and watch how well it has been stored. So contextual interference. To use another example, there's a study by Robert Bjork at UCLA, Robert and Elizabeth Bjork, who have a lot of good information on this, where they simply had people study for a math test, one in one room and another studied in two different rooms. Out of those two groups that they studied, the people who studied in two different rooms consistently got better grades. I believe it's because the different environment forces you to focus a little bit more. It's a little unusual. They actually did one thing. This isn't conclusive. I just heard him talk about this in a podcast where they looked at people shooting penalty shots, which normally you want to be in front of the goal, soccer. Normally you want to be in front of the goal, kicking it. And that is a good way to practice. But there's another way you can practice for that. Stand behind the goal and watch someone else do it. Reflect on it. Where was that person? And that will actually make you better at the kicking in front of the goal. We generally don't think about these things. So that's contextual interference. Then there's the use of memory. This is a controversial topic. I realize somewhere around the 20s to the 1950s, lots of memory going on in school. If you see those I'm old enough to see those old clips from the 50s where they're all sitting at the desk with their hands on the desk going, 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 6 is 30. And everyone's going, oh my gosh, that's not learning. Learning is critical thinking. Okay, that's all well and great. But then we threw out memory along with that thought. Wheels are in a car, but I don't care how nice your car is, you're not going anywhere without wheels. You don't throw out memory. Memory is crucial to all this stuff, but you don't teach it that way. Sitting there saying something over and over, that drill and kill. That's not the way to do it. What you want to do is understand memory happens in 3 phases: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Storage is how robust the memory is, how much detail you have. Storage is the getting it in part, getting it in, how robust, and then taking it back out. We spend far too much time with storage. There are all kinds of things we can do to memorize things very quickly on the spot, all kinds of tips and tricks, things we can even teach to young kids. I'll give you an example. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's using a tune to memorize something. Trust me, you can get way more nuanced with this, where you're marrying things that, what Roy G. Biv, the basic primary colors, Roy, indigo, whatever it is, green, blue. These things we use. We should be creating these structures for every student to memorize everything. Then when the critical thinking starts in class discussion, people don't just sit there like this. They have access to their long-term memory. But that's not just storage isn't just the end of it. You have to retrieve it. And this would take time in class, and you would get behind. And about 2 weeks in, you would start to go so fast and so far ahead that shortly after that, you would blow away anyone else teaching the same class at the same time and what you were doing before. You have to do retrieval. That is getting the information out just like it'll happen in real life, whether it's a test or whether it's a job or whether it's trying to just talk to a friend about a math problem. You're going to have to pull that information out when you need it, out of context, in all sorts of different ways and areas. There's a way to train for this. And this is the thing that would make a big deal in testing anxiety. There's a way to train for this. There's something called the forgetting curve, described about a little over 120 years ago. And we all know it. The longer from when you do something and learn something to when you try to do it again, the harder it is to remember and do that thing. And you keep forgetting. The idea is to interrupt the forgetting curve. So doing mass repetition doesn't create the forgetting curve. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 5 is 25. Doing that kind of stuff doesn't do that. So when you get to the test, or you get to a point where you need to know this information, you have a hard time finding it because it's out of context. And that's what flashcards were for in school. But boy, it took years to get through that. You can do this much more quickly to memorize stuff. So you get the stuff in, then you let the memory deteriorate just to a certain point, and then you remember it again. Even if you get it wrong, even if you can't find the memory, there's something that has been discovered called the testing effect that shows that without any further study, you are likely to remember it perfectly the next time. And if that one doesn't, it will be better. So in other words, getting it wrong is okay. It doesn't mean you haven't learned. What you're doing is creating a strength from your long-term memory to your working memory where you're using it in the moment. And so you start with whatever the interval is, and this could be easily inculcated into classrooms. Generally, I'll start with people at 5 or 10 minutes. So every 5 minutes, you just stop whatever it is you're doing. 5 times 5 is 25. That's it, whatever we're trying to memorize. And then another 5 minutes, another 5 minutes, you keep in. Eventually, that goes to, this is called, you do the Leitner system of spacing. Eventually, it becomes 10 minutes. Eventually, it becomes 20. And all you have to do is maintenance this stuff like once a week. And in fact, if you're in a classroom, you don't have to maintenance it. because class discussion and activities will be using these basic forms of memory to then access certain ones that you need in critical thinking and completing the projects. And of course, the projects by a teacher are designed to highlight certain things. But instead of losing half the class on that because they don't have everything memorized and retrieved, everyone will be able to retrieve all the time. And then associative memory kicks in. You'll hear something, and then something that's similar to that you memorize will be called up to your working memory. And this is how we have access, because working memory is only 7 to 9 pieces of information at a time. This is how we have access to the massive, massive, massive database in our long-term memory. Speaking is a good example of this. There is no way this is in my working memory right now. It is being formed in the moment that I speak based on memories that are in my long-term memory, not in my working memory. So that's retrieval. And that's a whole bigger thing. There's a great book called Make It Stick, which goes through this stuff. But that creates another problem. There is a big gap between the research and teachers. There's enough blame to go around on both sides. And this middle part in here is where I live. And it is a barren area and is the wild west of ideas. But I digress. You also need to be aware of mindset. And I know you're a mindset coach, and I don't know if you mean it in the terms of the formal Carol Dweck's work at Stanford. There's also another, not definition, but the general understanding in society that mindset is how you think about things, and that can be changed. Hers is a specific thing. She identifies 2 types of mindset. Now it's like 40 years of work on this stuff. She identifies 2 types of mindset: growth mindset and fixed mindset. A fixed mindset believes I'm born with what I got. No matter how hard I try, I can probably get a little bit better. But boy, if I show that I don't have talent, that's the other area, talent in something, then I just can't get better. And so if I fail, and remember what I just said, struggle and failure, if used properly, is the most efficient way of learning. I've noticed it's like weightlifting. The more you struggle, the more you get out of it. It's like feeling the burn, except I call it the blurn. And I always say to people, feel the blurn when they're struggling, because that is a real thing. It's making you better. And all you have to do is see the evidence. It might take a half hour, might take a day or 2, but you'll see the evidence. And she did things like gave puzzles to 2 groups of people, and had one group, they both solved them moderately difficult. And one group, she said, you're so talented. You're so gifted. You were born with these great abilities. To the other group, she said, you're very smart. You can figure things out. You know how to problem solve. When given an opportunity to do more difficult puzzles, many less people from the group told they were talented wanted to try the more difficult task because it would jeopardize their designation of talent amongst their peer group. How many times do we not do things, stretch ourselves, try to go beyond because we don't want to look like an idiot? Game over. And she identifies those who are willing to do that. And there's a lot more to this, but I'm giving the overview. Willing to do that as a growth mindset. That is, obstacles are just opportunities to figure out how to get over, up, around, through the obstacle. There must be a way. I'll figure it out. Failures are simply pieces of information. Doesn't mean I'm a failure. That's the most important thing about mindset. Just because you don't do well on something, that's an opportunity to figure out where you didn't do well and get better. It's not somewhere where you go, I'm terrible and I never want to do this again. So that's mindset, which has been watered down in our education system into a basic feel-good trope that is not with the research at all. And that trope is, whatever you do, just be confident when you go into a test because you have a growth mindset and know you're going to do well. No, growth mindset is created well before you get into the test, when you realize, like the kids I was telling you about in my school, like, oh my gosh, every time I try to remember the information, it comes right to me. Growth mindset is created based on evidence. It's not growth mindset as a faith that somehow you'll do better and then you'll feel better in the test. The other area, there's 2 more. The other area is the great, great, great misunderstanding of talent and giftedness. I highly recommend a book called Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin for a good scholarly overview of this, as well as a nice description of how to use deliberate practice. We don't have time to get into it here, but if you want to throw names at me, Tiger Woods, I can explain that. Mozart, explain that. A lot of the things we hear throughout history and a lot of the hyperbole we hear about this child did this or this, make money. They're for money. Now, Mozart and Tiger weren't, well, actually, that's kind of why Mozart's dad did it. But anyway, weren't that. But Beethoven's dad lied about how old he was. He wanted him to get accepted as a child prodigy because people pay more for that. People, why? I don't know. But people pay attention to that miraculous looking thing that must be some talent. No, it's not. It's how and how much you practice. And we always find this in everyone. I know there are going to be plenty of people who think, no. We believe talent based on faith. There is no evidence. But I saw this little kid. That's not evidence. You want someone doing surgery on you who watched a video and saw a little kid do something? You want someone who studied up. If you want to have real knowledge about something, study it. Look for the evidence. You don't have it. What we do have every time is an amount and type deliberate practice of work. The belief in talent is pernicious. How many people do we believe are really talented? 2%? What are we saying to the other 98%? What are we saying to the kid who's not good at math? Well, you just don't have math talent. The reason math seems so hard is because you have to master the previous step before you get to the next step. It's not like history where if you bomb the test on the Civil War, you can do better on the test on the Industrial Revolution. You can't do the next step of math until you learn how to do it. And that's why we think we don't have a math brain. And the same thing is with music and the arts. You have to do the previous steps. It's not like everything else. And so we think that requires talent. It does not. And as much as we want to celebrate talent, we're telling all these people who don't have talent, good luck, no matter how hard you try. And then we say, well, everyone has a talent. Well, what if that's for washing cars? If that's what you want to do with your life, that's not a problem. Go ahead and do it. Most people have greater aspirations than that. And that's kind of what we're telling them. And then the final thing I bring up with this is the idea of flow, which is also misunderstood. That's kind of the zone when you're working on something and you think it's been 10 minutes and you look up and it's been 40. You're like, what happened? You talk class for long enough. I'd sit there and go, okay, everyone pack up. And they'll go, what? We just got here. And I regret not writing down what happened every time that happened, because that is a duplicatable phenomenon. There's a researcher who's devoted his entire career into figuring out what that is. His name's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's spelled just like it sounds. It's one of these really complicated Eastern European names. And he devoted his whole career trying to figure out what this is. What is this state? What it is questioning and a full involvement in what you're doing. In other words, deliberate practice at its base is a flow. Before I say that, there are those who will tell you, and this is true in most cases, you have to have a significant amount of skill in something to experience flow, because flow is solving a problem that's a little beyond you, then solving it and having total mastery of the thing, and then solving a problem that's a little beyond you. And you're not going to experience flow playing quarterback in football unless you have some experience and you know how to do it and you know something about the routes and all this other stuff. But there is at least one exception to this higher level knowledge that you need to get into a flow state, which, by the way, is the highest state of learning, and the brain loves it. The brain loves being there, and we can get every kid there. And you're always learning in flow. It's not sitting on the beach. Csikszentmihalyi makes a distinction between pleasure, lying on a beach, playing a video game, and we need to have that in life. We need to have recovery periods. And enjoyment, when the brain is involved in flow and we are learning. We just don't teach kids how to get there. By doing this, you are always constant, and you have to scaffold a kid into this. You have to sit over them and help them, because when they reflect, they're not going to find anything. That will grow as you keep having them do it. I call it the opening of focus as you create a mental model. This is constantly problem solving. There's no boredom in learning. Okay, I did it. How was it? I didn't do it right. What was wrong? Okay, I did it. That was good. Then I go to the next thing. What was it? You'll look up when you're doing this, and all of a sudden, 40 minutes will be off the clock. And this quest we have for flow, and there's a lot of bad information out there, really does happen within the basics of deliberate practice. And that's what I call the ecosystem of learning.
Before I start to dissect all of that, I want to say I read most of those books, and I encourage everyone to read those books, actually, because those books are great learning tools, and they really help with your mindset and just how you can think about things. I think sometimes we give ourselves a blanket statement or a blanket idea, and these books really go in depth and they really challenge your way of thinking, because I think what's happening in our society today, why people can't be cordial anymore, is because there's a challenge to what they believe. So, I believe a certain thing. And if someone challenges that, well, why do you believe that? That's silly. Or why are you doing that? That's wrong. Once there's a challenge and that person is like, okay, now I have to reflect, am I doing something wrong? If you look at the child development, right, we start with our environment and our behavior, then we go up to our values and our beliefs, and then at the top is identity. Identity is such a critical factor for many teens and young adults, because if they don't have that identity, who the heck are they? And they're trying to find that out. So those books really do a great job with understanding identity, allowing it to not be there, and then reforming it. So it's really important to have people start to learn that process. It's one of the first things I wanted to say. But then we get into the learning process, and I completely agree with you in how we should teach something. My cooperating teacher, he was also a high school music teacher. He taught, band chorus. Well, he didn't teach chorus, he taught band. And there was another chorus teacher there. He was also amazing too. What he did was he said, no matter what the student is, I don't care if they're a senior, I don't care if they're a freshman, we're starting from ground zero. We're starting from step number one, because we want to make sure we fill in any holes if they have that in their education. So in music theory, we are going to learn quarter notes again. I don't care if they can do 16th notes. We are going to work on quarter notes. We're going to work on whole notes, right? And we're going to draw them and we're going to see how they sound, all of that.
Contextual interference.
Exactly. So he's going from the start and then he has a goal, he has a plan for them. When I saw that, it was kind of like, whoa, I'm already applying this, because before I was doing teaching in college, I was a swim instructor. And everything I did when it came to that was starting from zero. I don't care if you were an Olympic swimmer, we worked on your kicks first. I would always ask the parent, I was like, do they know how to swim? Parent might say, no, they don't know how to swim, or they might say, yes, he's a really good swimmer, she's a really good swimmer. I said, okay, great. We get in the pool, I act like he doesn't or she doesn't know how to swim. And I'm working on the kicks. When the kicks are good, we work on the body. Then when the body's good, we work on the arms. When the arms are good, we work on the head. So we are going systematically from start to finish. And then from there, I'm able to really help them become a better swimmer in that 30 minutes. Because after the 30 minutes, they're like, whoa, just like how we got into that flow state, this is like, I didn't know I could do this, because we were focusing on things systematically.
That's the motivation, right? That's where the motivation comes from. When you do something you didn't know you could do before, that's where the joy of learning is, not in dumbing it down or turning it into a game. I don't mind gamification so much, but none of that. Not watering it down, not trying to make it easier. Actually, you make it hard enough. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. You make it hard enough that it's not easy, but not too hard. And you have them do the questioning process throughout, and they will get sucked into learning. That's where the joy of learning occurs.
And then to go into your idea of everyone gets a trophy. For me, I'm not a fan of that. I believe that you should see that you're making a mistake. You should see that you have room to grow, and then you grow in that space instead of, okay, you did a great job. Because what it does for many people is, well, I don't have to really try. I don't have to really be assertive and push myself. I can just show up. And there's a difference between showing up just to show up and showing up to handle business. So what I do is I teach people to show up to handle business, because there's a big difference in simply saying, okay, everyone, we're going to do our best. And at the end of it, we're all winners. I can understand the emotional aspect and the emotional intelligence part of that, but we do have to have something different. And the mindset, what I teach is a little bit different. It's that you can accomplish anything, but what happens is that we give ourselves limits. And so what I focus on with my mindset coaching is limiting beliefs. Giving you a story. When I was a swim instructor, there was another swim instructor who had a different student, and I was doing makeup lessons that day. This is not my student. This is her student. And so I had a free spot, and she asked if I can take that student because she was double booked for some reason. I said, not a problem. So I'm starting to work with this kid. We're working on the kicks, like he doesn't know how to swim, and he knows how to swim. And so we start working on the body. We started working on the arms. And I'm seeing he's a really strong swimmer. I'm like, all right, let's go into the deep end. Guess what? He's afraid of the deep end. So we're like, okay, not a problem. We start from the beginning. So we just start from the wall. We're in the wall on the little side, and then we start to go a little bit deeper. And we got to a point where the teacher is like, don't even bother. He can't do it. The limiting beliefs. And this is an instructor, right? And she was going on to be a teacher. So she was in her master's program at the time. So she's a teacher for some class, and she's over here telling someone that they can't do something. And that's very common in teachers, that they might look at a student and say, you're not going to surmount to anything. And that's very hard because it's different. There's a big difference between like everyone can achieve something, everyone can win, or a teacher saying you're never going to surmount to something. So what I did was I said, okay, game on. So I had maybe 20 minutes left with the student. What we did for that 20 minutes was we were hammering hard. I knew I can do it in 20 minutes. It's just that it was very fast paced for the student, where I had to make it so quick where he couldn't even think. And it was basically, I had to build the trust with him. And then from there, had him swimming. No problem. After the lesson, I go over to the mom, give the student to the mom, and the mom's like, oh my God, you did more than 30 minutes with him than he did his whole entire time here with the other instructor. I said, thank you, blah, blah, blah. And she wanted to switch instructors, but I was already booked. And then she was like, okay, long story short is that there's going to be teachers who look at a student and they're going to see what they can't do rather than what the teacher can do. How can I help this person? And it's about planting the seed. We give someone an opportunity. And that opportunity, it might not be in 10 minutes, might not be today, but it can happen. And we just have to have that faith. So I offer many people the opportunity. So I'm going to plant a seed. and it's going to sprout eventually. Sometimes you need a trauma. Trauma is like the fertilizer sometimes.
The literature shows that fear works great for deliberate practice. We've all done deliberate practice when we're scared, all of us.
And from there, that trauma can really ignite drive, passion, and then it could really get you to where you want to be, the finish line. I would like for trauma not to be that factor for many people so they can just go off and do what they have to do. But for the majority of people, they need that trauma. So mindset is looking at where they are and then figuring out why they're not accomplishing the things that they're looking for. So if they want a better relationship, why? If they want a better body, why? If you want a better life in general, what's stopping you? And we look at that aspect because there's so much to mindset and it's more than just growth minded and fixed minded.
There's a lot that falls under those particular definitions. But yeah, that's the scientific way of looking at of the particular slice of mindset and how she defines it. And there's so much good information there. And you're right, inculcating it. Failure isn't that bad. Not getting a first place trophy isn't that bad if you understand the value of mistakes. Not only that, but when they don't get the first place trophy, say, here's your solution. If you want to get better, this is what you do. In fact, at that moment, I'm betting what you can say is, do you understand why you performed poorly? Yeah, I didn't do the things you asked me to do in the way you asked me to do them. That's a great time. That is the perfect lesson to learn. And so you're not a bad person. You just chose not to do something. You can choose to do it next time or get the same results. But yes, you got to offer a solution.
And from that solution, we can start to make progress. And I think what's happening right now, another thing was, with the school system is that we're not allowing the students to make progress because parents are so prominent in their kid's life. I've had a parent come in and yell at a principal saying, why did my kid not get an A?
I've had that. I've been threatened with legal action. I never went anywhere because I documented everything I did and how I did my grades. But Yep,
it's common. And I remember when I was in my internship for my master's, there was a teacher, she documented everything too, but the parent came in every single morning when she dropped off her son, every single morning. And the principal went to the teacher one day and said, is this really worth it? Is this really worth it? Because she had all the documents, she was able to prove it, but the principal was like, does it really matter if she really wants her son to have an A? Because that's on her now. Teacher was like, you're right, it's not worth it. Kid got an A. Where now that kid learned something and it wasn't a good thing. Mom's going to stick up for me. Mom's going to fight my battles. I don't have to fight my battles. And that is going to be the worst thing for that child because now they're going to hit some challenge, some difficulty. Mom might not be there and they have to figure out how to handle it themselves.
There's people in college going up to professors with their cell phones, with their parents on the cell phone going, I want you to talk to my mom. And it's not like one or two times. Can you believe this? Right? One of the problems, I always said when it comes to parents and students that ignorance in love is a toxic brew. And it is because love will do anything. You'll fight a bear. It doesn't matter. But ignorant, what are you saying about me? We're all ignorant about far more things than we're smart about. We don't know a lot more than we know. But the misunderstanding is that teaching's easy. You just tell someone something you already know, and then they just pick it up. And if they don't have talent, they don't get it. And if they do, and everyone thinks they know how teaching works, and then they can judge it based on their really limited metrics that they don't really understand. Why does my student not feel good? Maybe a student doesn't feel good because he doesn't follow directions. If he just followed directions, then he'd feel a lot better. But don't want to do that because that's hard to do. So I'm going to document this, and then I'm going to show this study that I pulled off of YouTube. And then no, you don't know. You've spent 6 months trying to figure out how to get your kid an easy ride instead of figuring out how education works. But they don't know that. They're in a place of ignorance. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, when you think you know more about something than you actually do because you don't have enough information about it yet. Your mental model is too small. And so it's a catch-22. I don't know enough, so I don't know what more I need to know. That's where we humble ourselves and go to a teacher or a coach and try to figure it out. But then you add love into it. And love is blind. And it's tough. And that's why I said it's a toxic brew. And I had to navigate that as well. The problem with the teacher giving the A, and it maybe is that I was at a smaller school, a private school, and I kind of would stand up in those situations. The problem with that is now a couple kids hear about it because the kid's going to tell everyone how my mom and set that teacher straight. And now other people are going to not do their work leading up to the test, thinking maybe erroneously that I can get out of it. And maybe only 1 out of 5 kids who did that has a parent that's going to come at you. Those other 4 fail. And so I would never want it to get it because they'll say, but you did it for so-and-so. You do it once and you're caught in that sort of stuff. And then you look dogmatic, or no, I'm not a drill sergeant. I'm doing things with the grand scheme of everyone's good in mind. Sometimes you have to accept that when you're angry about something, you're wrong, and just chill out and let it work. I can't tell you how many times I had parents come in and read me the riot act because their kids were doing poorly because they weren't following directions. And when they were up against the wall, when I stood up all the way through the meetings, when the principal was in the meetings, they stood up. Most of those kids just started paying attention and doing work. Can't tell you how many of those kids went through my second and third level classes. Once they started to get good, as you say, you give them the solution and that creates the motivation. Once they started getting good at it, and this just doesn't work for music or sports, it works for everything. Believe me, science is more interesting. I don't think it's interesting because I don't know a lot about it. Well, I think cognitive science is interesting. But if you knew more about it and you were able to get into that state where you could solve problems and think about it and do some critical thinking, you'd like it a lot more. This goes all the way back. If we started teaching people the principles of learning, like how to store memory, how to use it in critical thinking, little things like that, we could make the whole educational system enjoyable. This is what's missing. And this is what the parents are really fighting for. I want my kid to learn, but I don't want him to feel uncomfortable. Well, okay, as long as you understand moments of discomfort are important in the learning process. But yes, feeling like you're worthless, no, that should never happen. There's wires crossed somewhere. There's two things I want to bring up when you talk about the education system being messed up. One of the biggest problems is failure is built into the system. Everyone just accepts a certain amount of kids will fail, a certain amount of kids will get D's. No. And I took a note on this when you brought it up earlier. I've heard things in teacher groups, online teacher group, where people are saying, well, you don't want to try to force someone to do something they're not capable of. What? If he passed third grade, he's in fourth grade, unless there's some real problem with it. What do you mean not capable of? And they look and say, well, he can't do it. He tried. What do you mean try? Did you really try contextual interference? Did you try encoding? Did you try? No, you didn't try any of that stuff. And that's pretty horrible. And we accept that failure is built into the system, which it isn't. And also, I think there is a way to change it. But the way we try to do it is top down. I think the way is bottom up. I have a whole plan I'm going to do someday. But the way is bottom up. You talk about how we reform education system. This is something I call getting it just right enough to get it wrong. That's when you get your facts right and you come to a completely wrong conclusion, usually one serving one's own interest. And if you dig deep enough on the facts, you'll realize you've misused some of them, but people don't dig deep. That's the problem. They find what they're looking for, confirmation bias, and then go with that. So we've had, how many reforms in education have we had since the 50s? I count at least 4. One was No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top. There's a Common Core, and there's been others. I remember in the 90s when people who had degrees in English were having to teach math, and that's when the credentialing system became really tight, and you had to have a credential in your area to teach and that sort of stuff. We get all these people with fancy degrees, okay, on the researcher side that does not know how to translate their research to the teacher side. Teachers don't know how to understand the research. Like I said, there's this barren area. And we look at those impressive degrees. That's true. Impressive degrees are impressive. That's true. People with impressive degrees know lots of stuff about stuff. That's true. So we have this team of people who will be able to solve it. That's false. And so we do what they say, and it never really works out. I'm fond of saying, we've had all these people with all these degrees and these government programs and all this stuff, and clearly no one's gotten it right because we keep going back and reforming it. Doesn't it make sense that maybe a recovering high school music teacher has figured it out? Maybe that's where it's going to come from. I'm as surprised as anyone. I wasn't looking for it.
Just kind of looking at, I guess, two separate aspects. So one being like the teacher saying, oh, he can't do it. It's similar to how like a kid doesn't want broccoli, so the kid just gives it to the dog. Where now the third grade teacher says, oh, he can't do it, so now it's no longer her problem or his problem. And now it's the fourth grade teacher's problem. So if I can get this student out of my hair, that's going to be good for me because I'm already overburdened. I don't want this student for another year. So I'm going to pass the student on. And that happens quite often. And it's sad because that student is not ready for the next level. It's just that now they have to find a way to be on that level. Hopefully for that student, they have that next level teacher who's going to show up and see where they are.
At some point, you can't do anything about it because they're too far too, right?
So there are going to be many situations where the student is just so far gone. And then that's where behavioral issues start to come in because the student is already checked out. They're like, I can't do this. This doesn't make sense to me. And it's because they don't have the building blocks. They're going to need a lot more support. And not every school district has the funds for that support. So it just depends on where the child is.
Teachers are in a bad spot. So we talk teachers should do this or that. they've been put in a bad spot many times with almost no good option. You choose the best of the worst options. And let's face it, folks, people, at least I'm just speaking the country I'm in, no one's going to up their taxes to pay what it really costs to get it done right. So let's just face it. All this stuff about we need individual plans. I'm not talking about IEPs. I'm talking everyone needs to have their performance evaluated, not a test. That's great. I agree with all of that stuff. Who's going to pay for it? No one's going to pay for that.
Just to start, you would have to double the teacher salaries and then add another teacher into the mix, because that's what it's going to take at a minimum. That's the minimum.
And they have to get more training and better training. I call teaching a no-fail job. But if you look at how most no-fail jobs are taught, pilot, doctor, where you can, or surgeon, where you can, when you solo, when you finally get into something and it's all yours, you cannot make anything but the most minor of mistakes because people's lives are in your hand. Same thing for education. Now, how long does it take to become a doctor and what's the process? Look at that. 10 years, 10,000 hours just to get in the door. The way we do it in teaching, where when you do it, a residency in some good place, you're getting people who've seen this stuff, who everything is on the line. It's someone who's mastered this idea of showing you stuff. We're already behind the eight ball as it is when we're becoming teachers, and now we have to somehow train other people to do it. And they are required to do professional development, and pilots are required to continue to do flying hours. What are we required to do? Some guy who costs $2,000 is going to fly in and do our... I went through enough professional developments in 13 years. 2 of them were good. We can't afford to get the good people that the doctors and the lawyers and the pilots are getting. We would need to teach it like a no-fail job. This is the only no-fail job I can think of that's taught in this way with such little education allowing us in. That's not the teacher's fault. It's the fault of the system that says we just don't have money to do it the other way. I do believe there is a bottom-up solution, bearing in mind that the situation will never be perfect. When it happens, I'll let you know.
Well, I'm definitely not going to hold and wait for that, because we could take some action today. And the quarantine showed us a lot about the school system. It showed us the failures of it. Many parents also saw that teachers play a very important role in a student's development. And when those parents were starting to see their kids in the home not doing the work, struggling, now they started to say, well, what's going on, right? What's really going on? Because this kid is not learning and they're having a hard time. Maybe there's some type of barrier, whether it be technology or the student is just not being interested in what is being taught. And especially there's not that intraperson type of bond anymore. So there's no in-person teacher saying, hey, let me come over and see that you're struggling. Because if you're behind, a monitor, you can easily take a screenshot or not have your camera on. And we don't know how you look. We don't know how you're feeling. That right there was already a detriment to education, because now parents are seeing, well, my kid is struggling. I don't know what to do. Right. So many parents said, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to homeschool. So that's what they did. Many parents decided to homeschool. And there's other factors to the homeschooling, whether it be political mandates, things like that. Right. So it's certain things that were in place that many parents didn't like for their kids. So they said, I'm going to take my kid out of school and do it myself. There's kind of like a two-pronged thing going on, whereas parents seeing that their kids are not learning in school, so they're taking them out and saying, I'm going to take ownership of that. And then there's the things that school is teaching that they don't want their kids to learn. So I'm going to take ownership of my kids' learning. These parents might not have the time. They might not have the education. And what they're doing is that they're taking on a role that they're not effective in, because mom and dad is mom and dad. Mom and dad is not a teacher. So certain things.
Easy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anyone can do it.
You
just have to read a cereal box.
Tell people about it.
You just got to read a cereal box and you're good to go. But that is not the case where, like the work that you do as a learning coach, you're going to fill in those gaps, I think, especially now, because we're going to be going into a very strange and new time for many parents and many teachers, because there's going to be many students who are going to be looking for answers. There's going to be many parents that are going to be looking for answers. And I think some of the work that you do is going to have the answers for them to really help them understand what learning is and how to help their children learn.
Yeah, I think so. And then it's a matter of how you teach it. Little teeny bits. It's funny. We are exactly the same in this. We can use different terms, but we are exactly the same in this. Find that little thing. Just keep drilling their kicks. Find that little thing that they couldn't do before that they can now do. And that thing makes them better at something. They can swim a little faster, have a little more control in their direction, whatever it is. Oh, I've got that fact. That's great. There's going to be a test on that. That's going to make me better. If I could do that 30 more times, that test is going to go a lot better. And by the way, that is the foundation of self-esteem. And let's give self-esteem. Let's go back to this first place thing. Let's pat everyone on the back and tell them they're just great. Okay, everyone's not great just because they roll out of bed. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity because they roll out of bed. Everyone deserves to be treated with their rights and dignity. But you don't deserve to be called a genius unless you act like a genius, unless you do genius things. If you want to be a genius, you can become one. It's not this magical gift somewhere. So instead of the pat on the back all the time, you get them better at stuff and then build on that so they become better and better and better. Problem is, it can be a little bit hard to do. And that's the art. And that's, I think you've got it figured out. Clearly, you've got it figured out. I think I've got it figured out too. We don't walk in the door saying, look, we have all these learning things. Okay, first, I want you to do deliberate practice here and then no mindset over here. Now try some contextual interference after you do that. And then, which is how it goes after you really learn how to do that stuff. Eventually, you get to a point where you're just talking, okay, have you tried contextual interference? An interesting story, something about performance stage fright. And I didn't realize this wasn't so much in my area, which is classical guitar, but this was a violinist, I believe. She would dread going to lessons. She'd drive an hour to her lessons. She'd practice really hard. And then I go into lessons and she told me all the mistakes I made. I'm like, well, isn't that what lessons are for? I always knew I was going to make mistakes in lessons. And this person with very impressive, letters like DR in front of her name and very impressive letters after it was talking about us and saying, maybe we should rethink this. And instead of saying it's a mistake, maybe we should say, could you possibly think of another option at that point? Okay, that is another getting it just right enough to get it wrong. You're taking care of the problem too late. Why didn't they have strategies to get it right in their practice before they got there? Then when they get there and you say, that section isn't working, is it? No, you made a lot of mistakes. What did you try? Well, I tried this, this, and this. Okay, I need to formulate a new plan. When I deal with mistakes with people, it's like, let's fix them. And you don't have to water it down or use kinder words. You just have to give solutions. And that's where self-esteem comes from. I tell this to people that I would do with music all the time, and they would feel really good. And I'd say, this isn't the joy of learning music that you're feeling. It's the joy of learning. It works the same for everything. People think music because it's this magical thing, and it is. People think music, somehow, once you get it, it has this, but that magical feeling comes with understanding science at that level. The reason it happens more with the performing arts is because you actually have to get good at something to feel that. And in performing arts, you got no choice. In performing arts, 95% is an F. If you walk in and watch a kid's band play, or you go see your favorite band and they make 5% total mistakes in a concert, oh my gosh, you'd be like, either, I guess it's a first year teacher and they'll get better. Yet we honor and laud that in academic classes. There's a reason this works in our system. It gives you enough to move on if you ever want to go back and learn the thing, you have a foundation. But we are not teaching mastery. This goes all the way back to the pernicious belief in talent. Well, not everyone has the talent to understand physics at that level. Not everyone has the talent to understand math or history. It's where your talent is. That's not why that's going on. And it's not cruel to ask people to do the small amounts of work to get better, which then, to bring this full circle, goes back to that whole idea of self-esteem, which is the joy of learning. And then all of a sudden, it's still hard work. And I still work very hard on things and get frustrated and don't want to do it. But we have a plan and we always know where it's going. The worst part, the thing that causes and you brought this up earlier with behavior issues when you just can't understand. The worst part of it is when you're bad at something and you have no idea what to do about it. And that's most kids in school. We don't give them an actual solution other than and this would work, do all your homework the day it's assigned, the way it's assigned. That's a bit rough. How about doing retrieval practice in class and stuff like that? So yes, going back to this idea of self-esteem and doing little bits and building it up. And that's how I think the school reform thing will happen too. Little bits, building it up. And, it'll eventually work its way up through in a couple of years. And then eventually the only people left will be total outliers who are unwilling to do it. And the parents will say, get them out of there.
Yeah, definitely. And learning, as you said, is a love. Even when I was learning guitar and I was learning all the instruments in school, I enjoyed the process of learning that. Like, you learn the scales and everything, and you learn it on the piano. It's pretty simple. Then you learn it on the guitar, and then you might try sax. And you're like, okay, this is more difficult now. So you have a basic learning of scales, all of them. But then when you're trying to implement it on a new instrument, you're kind of like, well, I don't really like this instrument. I'm not good at it. And you're not going to be great at everything because it's going to take time for you to become proficient at it. And we do have to understand that learning is a process. And it's something that I love. I mean, I love to learn. I love to read. At one point in my life, I didn't love learning. When I was probably like in third grade, I hated learning because I wasn't good at it. I wanted to daydream in class. I didn't want to learn or read. But then I started to get teachers that would, be there for me, and they would encourage me to learn. And it's so important that you have someone in your life. It doesn't have to be a parent. It doesn't have to be a teacher. It could be a learning coach like yourself, Greg, where they are going to teach you the love of learning, because what happens after that is magic. And I wanted to ask you, this is a question I asked very few people. If you had a magic wand, what would you use it for? You only get one wish. What would you use it for?
A building with teachers in it, and I get to tell them how to teach.
Okay.
And they do it. That's what because I could prove something to the world. That's what I would want. Teachers who are taught how to teach. Let's get a whole environment and watch what happens. That's what needs to happen. I mean, that's, I put myself out there that way. It's an unusual idea to hire someone in to come, but I almost did it at the top STEAM middle school in Arkansas, and then it fell apart. I almost did it at a law school in New York University, and then someone lost a job. I'll get my opportunity sooner or later, but it's that thing. I believe you can do it from the bottom up, where you just teach a few little memory things, and then all of a sudden the grades go up. And so some opportunity to do that, whether it's starting with a whole entire school of open-minded teachers, or even better, people like yourself who already get most of it. It's just in a formal teaching environment. You do this a little bit this way, you do this a little bit that way. And then, because we have a curriculum and we have to do all this stuff, that is what I would do. Or, okay, you're looking for a different answer than I understand than that. You know what I'd do? I'd somehow make it acceptable, financially rewarding enough, acceptable and worth the sacrifice to have a training system for teachers that is the same as pilots or surgeons. Okay, a doctorate in the same way, where you have to spend hours behind, in the cockpit with someone standing by you in case you make a mistake and that sort of thing. And the people who are standing by you are also good teachers. They don't just happen to be, we think because someone's a teacher, they're a good teacher, so they can teach new teachers coming in being a teacher. No, insert pilot teacher. Is that person a good teacher? Maybe a good pilot? I don't know. We'll just have to see. So the people who end up teaching that stuff are people who have gotten good at it, because the standards are quite high. Music is a good place to start with this, because all music teachers are doing this, because our standards are the performance standard. And that's what I'd love to see. And everyone hears this and, oh my gosh, you expect teachers to go to school for 10 years and then do like a 1-year residency and then do... Yeah, if it was paying $120,000 a year, we could find people to do it. That's what I do with my magic wand.
Definitely. For the second one, it's going to be, I think, a little bit more challenging, because you will have teachers who are paid sufficiently, but the students are still going to be with the regular curriculum, and they're still going to be with the regular diocese if you're in private school. So it's going to be the regular structure still. So yes, teachers are more equipped to handle most of the situations, but they might not have the resources. And I think resources are a big factor in education too, because if you don't have ink, I remember in my district, toward the end of the school year, we ran out of printer ink. And basically, we had to go to other schools in order for us to print out copies of papers we needed for the students. So it depends on where you are. I love your first wish or your first wand, because it really creates that environment. This is the school that we're going to be going in, and this is a no-mess school. Because if you go to a regular school, it's going to be that same atmosphere. Look at middle school, for example. Why do you think students go from elementary school into middle school and they totally change? And this is not only hormones, it's the environment that they're in. So the environment plays a critical factor.
Yes.
And your first one is creating that environment. Going back to the child development, environment, behavior. If you can have control of that, as you said, you would have control. Is going to create everything. And then that identity that's created is not going to be just a growth-minded individual. It's going to be someone who says, I know how to learn, and I'm going to implement that process in everything I do. That is a great way to begin. And that is how you can change the whole education system. But you have to have a pilot. So you starting that first wand is the pilot for everyone else to learn. And when you have this school and maybe it becomes a prestigious school all across the globe, maybe people are come to this school because they want their kids to learn this way. And eventually it's going to catch on. People are going to see, well, it's working. And then that's how it happens. Versus, I'm going to pay teachers hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you're still going to get lazy teachers. You're still going to get teachers who have that negative concept of belief in a child, where you're not going to surmount to anything, Johnny, because you're like a dip head or whatever they want to call them, right? There's still going to be teachers like that who will spend the 10 years, who will do their residency, and they will still not do the job. But if you have control over the teachers that you bring into your school and you hold them to a high standard, that's the key. Because once tenure hit, typically in our regular school system, it's pretty tough to get rid of that teacher.
We have to reform tenure. And one way you can do it is a severance package for people so they're not as afraid of losing their darn job and moving on. You do 20 years somewhere. My wife walks out with 20 months of severance pay. I walk out with nothing. So you have to make it less fearless to do that. And I do believe that it can be done. What you're saying is that's right. It'll catch on because people will see everyone's getting A's there. And after all the investigations into whether you're doctoring the grades and everything, and everyone's going to come in, transparency, come on in, see how we do it. Oh my gosh, they have a new system. Everyone's going to want into this. I believe this can be done at an individual school, starting off with 1, 2, 3, 4 teachers, starting off with just one little thing. Let's do a little bit of encoding and retrieval practice. Watch what then happens to your class discussions. They now become more productive. Watch what happens to your test grades. It would be dramatic. By the first quarter or so, it would be dramatic. Then watch what happens. The kids learn even more. Then watch what happens to the kids out at recess. Guess what we learned? We learned you can memorize something by making a picture out of it. And I learned this. Now kids start having little memory contests or things like that. But let's just stay with the first thing. All of a sudden, the grades go up after the investigations, rightfully so, that there's nothing hinky going on there. Okay. Oh my gosh. Well, guess what happens then? And some of the parents are going to go, I want into Mrs. So-and-so's class next year. Can I get in there? Or they're going to say, how come Mr. So-and-so doesn't do what Mrs. So-and-so is doing? Her grades have gone up 52% in the last semester, because that's how dramatic it would be. Probably even more than that. That's how dramatic it would be. And not only that, but the people who do poorly, you could tell them and their parents exactly why they did poorly. They didn't do this, they did this. They didn't do that, they did that. Then there's going to be pressure. And once it works for those teachers, now you can start adding the other thing. You go to a new level. Then there's going to be pressure amongst the other teachers. Some will sign on to start doing it. Not everybody. And the parents are going to put pressure on. We're paying the same amount for our kids to go here, or the government is paying the school the same amount for our kids to go here. Why are some getting a vastly superior education? All of a sudden, all this stuff about be nice to my kid and, what college can we get into if we do? All of a sudden that goes out the window. Oh my gosh, my kids are actually learning. They come home and talk about who knows what that they learned in school today to me about history, about Shakespeare, about whatever. Oh my gosh. And they're kind of enthusiastic about it. Now the pressure grows. Now the school wants to start doing it. And what happens is over the course of years, I believe it would start off with just 1 or 2 things with a few teachers. Those teachers would have, because it will work and they will get what everyone gets. They get the reward of doing something well. And they would, this is great. I'm going to keep doing it. They would want it. So now they're on the way up. Then more teachers get on the way up. Then the parental pressure becomes more and more. And you either do this and get the results, you don't. There's no other way around it. I just can't teach my kids. Now, environment, sure. Is it a safe environment? Do you have enough ink and everything? I'm leaving that out. But as far as just the teachers, so you talked about some teachers will be bad. They'll just want to be there to pick up a paycheck. I agree. Get out of teaching. You have too much in your hands to treat it that way. Get any other job that doesn't have people's lives in your hands, please, if you're going to do that. But what'll happen is these teachers will have an option. It's going to be clear. And maybe not the first time, the second time. You can fail. But by the 5th time, you're not doing this stuff. I'm telling you, you're not doing this stuff because it works for everyone else. And it will be obvious to everyone what's going on. Some will come around and find the great joy of teaching. And then what are you going to be left with after 2, 3, 5 years? You're going to be left with the ones that are at every school who just think they know everything and aren't going to change for anything. And their whole pride is taught up in the way they teach. Well, they're going to be very uncomfortable at that school by that point. And they're either going to want to go to a different school or leave, just get out of teaching, because all the parents are going to say, this is an awful teacher. They could do what 90% of the school is doing, and they're refusing out of pride. The pressure would be, and I believe this could be done. And then once you have one school that works the same way, then that's the little seed to just start doing a little bit elsewhere. I believe it could be done that way. I've convinced a principal and a head of the law program at a college that it could be done that way. It just didn't end up making it past the superintendent and stuff like that. I believe it can be done. It's low risk and pretty easy. You come in and try stuff for a semester, a few little things. If it doesn't work the way I say it does, and it does, and there are other people who can do this too. You could do it, I'm sure. If it doesn't work that way, then okay, no harm, no foul. I'll tell you what, I'm going to charge you this much money to do it, but it's money back guarantee. If we don't hit these metrics, that's fine. We're done. And once that starts to happen, because it's a miracle. I hate it. I hate talking this way about myself, but I was at an arts magnet school in Houston, the big arts magnet high school there. Anyone there will know what this one is, Houston High School for the Performing Arts. And they have academics and they have music. And I spent time with the music in the morning and then doing professional development for the academics and everyone else in the evening. Coming out in the morning, the principal is introducing me after lunch. And he said, we're going to have this guy up after our little faculty meeting here. And everyone has started calling him the miracle worker. And I was there for 2 hours, 3 hours in the morning, just doing stuff. That's what it's like. I am not a miracle worker. The methods that I've discovered, which are available to anyone, are the miracles. Once you start doing that, it's going to be awfully uncomfortable to hold out for a long time and not do it too.
To change the school system or to change how education is, the whole reform is a daunting task. It's something that I think about quite often since I left teaching, is that I don't like the current system. I want to change the current system, but where do we begin? Because there's so many hands in it right now. And those hands don't want to relinquish those powers of control, right? They want to control what our kids are learning or how they're learning. At some point, there's going to be an uprising, I guess, of parents maybe, of seeing that their kids are not equipped to handle the world. And I don't know how many generations this is going to take or how many years, but there's going to come a point where it's going to be that tipping point where there's going to be no choice but change. And whether that reform happens with having your own school and starting from there, and we start to change it that way, or the whole entire system decides to change, which one will come first? I think that we're going to have to start with a pilot. I think, like your first one, I think that's spot on. Is something I think about quite often, is that I'm going to have to start a school and that I have to go from that school and basically be that trailblazer for people to see that it's possible. Because if we look at things that cannot be accomplished, for example, the 4-minute mile, Roger Bannister, it can't be done. Scientists said it can't be done. Education can't be reformed. Students are always going to learn this way. It's going to be the same thing. They believe it can't be done, but there's going to take some crazy guy that is going to reform it, who's going to change the game. And then at that point, everyone else is going to say, oh, it can be done and it will be done. So learning, education, there's so much to it. And there's so much more that we have to do. And this conversation is only the beginning of learning and of education and the whole change that can happen. But before we say our goodbyes, I kind of wanted to get your last words, and then please tell people how they can find you.
Okay, so just to finish that up, I'm probably repeating myself, but I do believe that the seed can be with just 1 or 2 teachers, 1 or 2 little things, and that it can grow from there. Because the realistic idea that anytime soon someone's going to give me a whole school, or anybody a whole school who's doing this, we give schools to people, but we don't give schools to anyone I know who's doing this, is probably not that realistic at this time. I believe it could start very small, but who knows where it's going to take me. So I'm excited to see, and I will add this. People like us who go into teaching, who really get it, a lot of us leave and go make real money because we try and we put everything we have into it. And we come up with these great ideas and we run up against these walls, which are, I kind of understand why they're necessary for the system and for the administrators to put up. But it comes from, how do I want to say this? Poor attitudes of some teachers, students, and parents. And so you have to put up these walls, and then that becomes an impediment. But once people start seeing the way it works, I think it would get better. How people can find me, I'm at gregggoodhart.com. There's a ton of stuff there. Generally, I can send you a couple links because there's one for music. If you play music and you can't figure out why you're so scared on stage and can't do what you did at home, trust me, there's answers to all of that. And I have some free thing that you can try, and it'll show you exactly what I do in my practice classes. And I'm also starting to write a book for general consumption of general skill development. I wrote one for learning music, and I will have actually a place for a waiting list for that. So I'll send the links on to you for those things. And that's about it. And I will say this was an amazingly enjoyable conversation. It is not often. I just recently had it happen with someone else too, but it's so rare where you meet someone who really gets it, especially someone who gets it from a different perspective. It's great. It's great. I'm with you on all these things. We probably have a few little differences here and there, and that's great. We'd probably work great together. You can be my principal anytime. If you start the school, give me a call.
And it's not about finding someone who's going to be there 100% with you, right? You want someone to challenge you. You want someone to say, hey, this could be different. Because if we just kind of say, okay, we have a team of people who say, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And they just lead you off the cliff, right? That was a great idea, right? So we need people to check us. We need people to give us that other point of view. And that's why a coach is so valuable, because a coach is going to be able to see your blind spot. I have coaches because if I don't have that, I won't be able to see my own failures. Because as you said, it's very difficult to reflect sometimes. And I mean, I'm pretty good at reflecting, but when I'm talking to my coach and I'm telling them what's going on, they're able to see, boom, this needs to be adjusted. And it's the smallest tweak sometimes. It's just a small tweak. It's not like, okay, you need to do this whole reform. It's literally just an adjustment.
When you see it, you're like, how could I have missed it?
And it's right in front of our eyes. And the learning process is a journey. And I want everyone to understand that people can make great strides in their life. They can make great improvements to their current situations or economic situations. They just have to understand the process. And I think some of the work you do is really good to help people see the other side. Just because you're a learning coach, it doesn't mean you can't change someone's life.
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the beginning, how well we learn will determine how good we get at anything. How good we get at anything will determine how happy we are. If we want to rob banks, you want to get good at it? Well, spend your time learning how to do it. If that will make you happy, it will probably make you sad in other ways, so I wouldn't do it. Or if you want to reform a school or be a great teacher or teach swimming, this works for that. Or be a good swimmer or be a good actor or be a good scientist. This is how it's done. And it goes without saying that at the end of that, if you choose the right career, is as much money as you want, or if your goal is to, house all the homeless people in the world, well, then that's great too. Then take all that money and house homeless people. Whatever it is you want to be successful in, whatever it is that will make you happy, you're going to have to learn how to do those things. So the better you go about the learning process, the more you learn about it, the more successful you will be.
Perfect. And I'm going to put all of your links in the description box below so people can easily find you. They can reach out to you and they can begin the process of learning. If they need a learning coach for themselves or for their kid, they know who to talk to. So I want to thank you so much, Gregg Goodhart, for coming on Coaching a Session. Great conversation today.
Thank you, Michael. It was wonderful. I appreciate talking to you.
All right, everyone. I'd like to thank you, number one, for staying tuned to the episode. I know it was a longer one, but it was a good one because we talked on so many great topics. And you can see that Gregg, he is passionate about the work he does, and he wants people to be in the best place possible. And the same with me, my mindset coaching. I want you to be in the best life possible. Sometimes we just have to look at where you are mentally sometimes. And that's what I do. I see where you are and I see what type of adjustments need to be made, what type of tweaks need to be made. And sometimes they're so small. Sometimes it's just creating some more action in your life, because it's very easy to say that we are going to do something, but we don't do something. Or it's very easy to say, you know what, I'm not feeling good. Or it's very easy to not show up. Well, I want you to show up. I want you to learn the tools necessary for your success. We are the problems oftentimes. We give ourselves roadblocks. Our mind is what's going to stop us from taking action. And we can learn how to fix that. We can learn how to be more prominent. And there's several ways we can do it. But I'm going to recommend that we start to look at where we came from and then start to make adjustments to where we want to be. Because even a small degree change, if we're traveling 10,000 miles, is going to leave us in such a different destination. So we might just need to always remember to stay back on track, to get back on course. And if you're finding that your life is not on track or on course to where you want to be, we need to make some adjustments. We need to make a change. And the concepts that Gregg and I talked about today in this episode is going to be talking not only about how to be an effective learner and the principles of learning, because that is a critical component to it, but also showing you that it is possible. And if you're making some mistakes, what are those mistakes? I think sometimes people think, oh, I can't do it. It can't be done. We get that limiting belief in our mind and we stop. And I'm telling you to not simply stop when something is not going your way or if things are not exactly how you planned for. We can make some adjustments. We can make some strides in the right direction. It's just that you have to understand how to do it. And I want to encourage you to challenge the status quo. I want you to challenge what you have been taught in your life and then to see if it's conducive to where you want to be. Sometimes it's not, and you have to make some changes. When I did my whole mindset shift, I had to get rid of a lot of the things that I've learned in my life. And it's kind of like you're tearing down the castle or the house you built, thinking, this is what I need. This is what I'm going to be living in for the rest of my life. But then you get to that point when you're starting to see, okay, I need to make some changes. What I built wasn't necessarily good. But we learned something when we destroy that house and we build it back up. We build the house better. Maybe in the beginning, we forgot to pour the foundation. Maybe we want to add a couple more rooms because we need more space. So we figure out what we need. We figure out what we did wrong. And then we adjust. And it's so important to understand how to begin, how to start. Because if you don't know how to start, then how can you finish? Everyone is looking at the finish goal. Everyone's looking at the finish line. Oh, it would be nice if I had this, or it would be nice if I was in this situation. Everyone wants the good stuff, but no one is willing to put in the work. And it's going to take you understanding how to begin so you can learn how to finish. And if you're having a hard time figuring out how to learn, how to be effective in your days and your time and your management and everything that is you and could be you, you're going to need some help. You can check out Gregg on his website and you can begin that process. If you're looking for mindset coaching, you could check out my website, revenconcepts.com, and then you could begin that process for change, for learning, for growth. And that is what we want to promote. Because if we can help you grow, everyone else is going to see what's possible. And then everyone else grows. It's kind of like a chain effect where you knock one domino down. But instead of us knocking down a domino and it being a negative effect, we're going to be knocking down all the insecurities, all the doubts, all the fears of failure, all the people who think that they can't surmount anything. We're going to allow you to break those walls and to be more in your life. And it's very simple. The only thing you have to do is pay attention. My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, you can email me, coachingasession@gmail.com. And I will see everyone on the next episode of Coaching a Session. Until then, everyone, take care.